It's interesting that you mentioned May because it was just announced that Trump is going to be in the Middle East and meeting with the new head of Syria in May. It was just announced today. Russia had quite a big role in Syria in the past, and then they have since shrunk their presence and also because of the new leadership there. Just to kind of pivot a little bit to that and Russian influence in other parts of the world. But your perspective on Syria would be really interesting to see. I mean, the current new president that's in place seems to be being embraced by the West a bit. Not so much with Russia, but definitely with Turkey and some of the Western countries.
Well, the man
Do you
you
think
call
it's
the
going to turn
president
into
of Syria,
hmm?
Al Jolani, is Al
Hmm.
Qaeda. The concept of
Former?
an American president meeting with a senior Al Qaeda official is disgusting. Al Qaeda attacked the United States on 9/11. Have we forgotten this? Al Qaeda has been singing death to America for decades. Al Qaeda is the most despicable organization on the planet. We should be killing these people, not embracing these people. I don't know what's going through Donald Trump's mind. I don't understand why he believes he can condition the American people into seeing Jolani as anything other than the head chopping son of a bitch that he is. So I don't know what he's doing. But again, let's just compare the two meetings. In May, Vladimir Putin is going to be meeting Xi Jinping, two of the most powerful men in the world, in a state visit that's going to solidify a relationship that's going to define the next century. Donald Trump's going to be meeting with Al Qaeda. The contrast between those two is stunning. What's Russia's role in all this? Look, Russia intervened in 2015 to bring stability to Syria in the aftermath of 4 years of CIA-driven, anti-Assad activity, where the black flag of Islamic extremism almost flew over Damascus. The Russians intervened to prevent that, and they succeeded. They reversed the tide, and by 2020 they had brought stability to Syria. The Assad regime was once again solidly ensconced in power. And the Russian job at that time was to facilitate not only that stability, but also to help Syria gain control over the totality of its sovereign territory. Between 2020 and December of last year, the Syrian government was not up to the task, and we have seen a collapse of unprecedented swiftness. I still don't believe that anybody truly knows exactly what happened. There's a lot of speculation there, but the idea that Bashar al-Assad, backed up by Russia and Iran, collapsed as rapidly as he did, the rapidity in which HTS, which is this Al Qaeda affiliate where Jolani governs, was able to take Aleppo, then Hama, then Homs, and then Damascus. I have yet to see someone explain how this happened exactly. A lot of speculation, but the specifics still are unknown. And I think the Russians are in the same position as everybody else, trying to figure out what the hell happened. How did this happen?
Well, a lot of people believe Turkey was involved, and now Israel has been threatening to build bases, and Turkey has been threatening or promising to expand their presence and their military presence in Syria to stabilize things. I mean, there's been a lot of flare-ups and unrest and killings across the country, especially with the minorities in Syria. But a lot of people are looking at this as though Iran has lost a big partner inside of Syria, and Russia has lost kind of their holding of that country. Is there any what's the future going to look like? Because Syria was the conduit to feed Hezbollah. It was the conduit to feed Hamas in a lot of ways, weapons and stuff from Iran. Is there going to be a vacuum there? Is the West going to come in because Israel's moving forward more and more into Syria, and then they're doing more bombings and such? What are your thoughts?
I think Syria is going to be condemned to a future of chaos and anarchy and violence and death. Nothing good's going to happen in Syria. It's fracturing as a nation state, as you mentioned. These Al Qaeda terrorists are killing Alawites, killing Shia, killing Christians, because that's what they do. They're killing Sunnis who don't conform to their strict, yeah, in some people would say, incorrect interpretation of Islam. Russia's interests have to be re-examined, and I'm sure Russia's doing that. Russia didn't intervene in 2015 to inject itself into the Mediterranean Sea. It was an intervention to stabilize the situation in Syria, to keep Bashar al-Assad, a close ally, in power. Assad's no longer there, and so Russia's reassessing what its role can be. But we have a changing world. You say Turkey was involved. We know Turkey helped create HTS, funded it, helped recruit, and guided its operations. But Turkey had its own government in exile. HTS victory took Turkey by surprise as well. And Turkey has been responding ever since, trying to play catch up. I don't think there was ever a scenario where Turkey thought that the black flag of ISIS and Al Qaeda would fly over Damascus, as opposed to the flag of the Syrian nationalist groups that it was supporting. But we do see Syria moving in now. They are moving air defense forces into Syrian air bases in order to confront Israel, which has been basically using Syria as a bombing range. And this could lead to a direct conflict between between Turkey and Israel in Syria. I don't think Russia wants to be in the middle of that. Russia does, the Russians right now are reevaluating their position. Syria was never of an existential nature for Russia, meaning that Russia could have cut and left Syria at any time and not suffered the kind of consequences it would have suffered had it cut in Ukraine, for instance.
Do you believe that Syria would have fallen if resources from Russia weren't tied up in Ukraine like they are?
Yeah, because how much more was Russia supposed to invest in Syria? The idea was to stabilize the Assad regime, which they accomplished. Russia wasn't going to put an armored division or army on the ground. Russia had its air force, a very limited air force presence. They had some other military assets there. But the problem for Syria is domestic political. The question is, how does Assad govern? When you look at the history of Assad, you understand he didn't want to be the president of Syria. He wanted to be a dentist, or not. An eye doctor, I believe, an ortho. Yeah. He was thrust into this role when his elder brother, died in a car accident. He became the president in 2000. Immediately he inherited a regime that he recognized as being fundamentally corrupt. He attempted reforms, but was blocked in those reforms by the domestic political realities associated with drought and famine. He had to rely upon the governmental institutions he was seeking to reform to keep himself in power during this time. And then as soon as the drought ended, we have the Arab Spring, and suddenly we have the foreign intelligence services of a number of nations, including the United States, facilitating uprisings in Syria, where once again, rather than doing the necessary reforms that would change the corrupt nature of the Syrian regime, he had to rely upon these governors and these generals to survive. The Iranians came in and provided assistance. The Russians came in and provided assistance, but it's primarily military assistance. When the war ended, both Russia and Iran put Assad on notice that he will have to make some fundamental changes, that it's the system he has in place is not sustainable. Assad was unwilling to make those changes. Instead, Assad turned to the Arab League, and rather than reforming his military or reforming the system of governance, he turned to the Arab League, who started pouring money into Syria. And I think money is the root of all evil, and I think the Arab League money ended up buying off a number of Syrian generals and Syrian governors and such, so that when the time came for the Syrian army to fight and die for Syria, they just disappeared. And there's no amount of Russian military aid that could have prevented that from from happening. Syria was corrupt from inside. It wasn't about Russia not providing enough resources. It was about Syria being unable to sustain a fundamentally corrupt system of government.